Hello, my name is Aurelia, and for most of my adult life, I was the live-in ghost of my own family. They never hit me. They didn't scream. They didn't kick me out. No, what they did was quieter, smarter. They kept me close enough to use, but just far enough to erase. I served their guests, folded their laundry, handed them the very awards they stole from me. They even used my photo, my face, on banners they claimed as theirs. But the worst part, they convinced the whole town I was lucky to be there, that I owed them. Until the day I found a key, a letter, and a voice recording that changed everything. What happens when the invisible daughter stops playing quiet? And when karma finally finds the woman who taught me how to disappear, what does it sound like? End of hook. Ready to proceed with the next part when you are. The bathroom mirror wasn't flattering that morning. Not that I expected it to be. The lighting above it had gone out 2 weeks ago, and Malis never replaced it, said it was a waste of power for someone who barely looked in mirrors anyway. I stood there, smoothing down the sleeves of the same light blue cardigan I wore to every family function. Not because it was my favorite, but because it was neutral, safe, invisible. I scanned the event brochure again. They always printed too many, piles of them on the kitchen counter, on the entryway table, even one taped to the fridge like a school award. My name wasn't listed under hosts or volunteers. It wasn't anywhere, again. Well, that's just an oversight, I mumbled to myself, folding the program. I'd used that same excuse for years. Oversight, mistake, misprint. But deep down, I knew it never was. The house was already buzzing. I could hear Valora's laugh echoing down the stairs, bright and sweet like honey over ice. She didn't even live here anymore, but when she visited, Malis treated her like royalty. Meanwhile, I had been up since 6 a.m. ironing tablecloths and sorting utensils in the backyard tent. By the time guests started arriving, I was stationed near the drink table, refilling glasses and avoiding eye contact. The tent was huge, white with gold trim, big enough to house a wedding. Malis spared no expense when it came to appearances. That's what mattered most to her. Appearances. Here, she said, placing a tray in my hands without looking at me. Don't forget the lemon slices. Some of the women from church are picky about presentation. I nodded without a word and turned just in time to hear her laughing with a well-dressed older couple. I only caught the tail end of her sentence. Oh no, she's not my daughter. She's just helping out. She lives with us. That she was me. The woman glanced toward me, her smile faltering slightly as our eyes met. I held the tray steady, gave a polite nod, and turned away before the burn reached my cheeks. I set the drinks down on the table and walked around the back of the tent, where no one could see me swallow that moment whole. I didn't cry. I hadn't done that in years. Not in public, not where they could say I was too emotional. I just stood there, behind the tent, pretending to be busy organizing napkins that were already perfectly arranged. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. Probably wouldn't be the last. The brunch moved on, full of laughter and small talk and speeches about the importance of community. I served fruit cups while Valora posed for photos, her hand resting lightly on Malis's shoulder like a porcelain doll at a photo shoot. Eventually, someone called out, "Let's get a family photo!" A rush of movement followed. Chairs were cleared, a backdrop set up. Malis stood in the center, flanked by Valora, her sisters, their husbands, even the neighbor she always called her second son. I stood just out of the frame, waiting. The photographer raised his camera. "Everyone ready?" Malis looked past me, straight at the lens. "Perfect," she said. Click. One of her aunts murmured, "Shouldn't she be in?" "No," Malis interrupted, her tone sharp but smiling. "It's a bloodline photo." I didn't react, I didn't say a word, but inside, something, a thread I'd been gripping for years, finally gave way. I stepped back slowly, away from the crowd, away from the fake smiles and clinking champagne flutes. I walked around to the rear exit of the tent and sat on the cold edge of a concrete planter. My legs were trembling, not from sadness, but from a strange kind of clarity. A memory surfaced. Me at 14, scrubbing the baseboards while Valora had a pedicure before prom. Dad had seen it. He didn't like it. "I want you to be respected, Aurelia," he told me that night. no matter what anyone says. And then he died 6 months later. I glanced down at the event program again, still folded in my hand. I opened it slowly, scanning for my name. Nothing. Not under volunteers, not under acknowledgements, not even a typo to suggest I was thought of. I folded it neatly, tucked it into my purse like a receipt I might need one day. People were still laughing inside the tent, toasting, posing, living out their curated lives. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my skirt, and walked away. This wasn't about a brunch. It hadn't been for years. It was about the weight of being invisible in your own home. I wasn't just angry, I was ready. That night, after walking through the neighborhood for nearly an hour, I returned home quietly, slipping in through the side door. I didn't bother turning on the light in the kitchen. I didn't want Malis asking where I'd been, or Valora tossing another offhand comment like, "Back from your little field trip?" Instead, I went straight to the hallway and paused outside the office, the room that once belonged to my father, before Malis turned it into a makeshift shrine for her nonprofit awards and velvet-trimmed stationery. I stared at the doorknob for a second, then kept walking. Not yet. The next morning, just after breakfast, Malis asked if I had a minute. She was already dressed, hair pinned back, lipstick that red she only wore when she had a meeting or an agenda. She held a tray with 2 mugs of tea and gestured toward the office. "Come sit with me for a bit, sweetheart," she said. I hadn't heard her call me that in years. I followed her in. She motioned for me to sit in the cushioned chair across from her desk while she placed the mugs on the edge. There was a manila envelope in front of her, thick, labeled in her tight cursive, "Property Transfer Addendum." "It's just a formality," she began, lifting the papers and unfolding them slowly. "With all the recent updates to the house and the potential zoning changes down the line, it's best to have things streamlined." I said nothing, waiting for the real reason. She smiled, that careful smile she saved for fundraisers. "It also clarifies everyone's roles, just so there's no confusion, in case, well, if anything were to happen unexpectedly." I glanced at the paper. Legal print, lots of it. I saw my name, my father's name. But where it should have said heirs or equal shares, there was a bold header that said, "Reallocation of remaining assets." My name had been typed in once, and then crossed out. A replacement name was typed above it in cleaner font, Valora Renford. Malis tapped the signature line with a manicured nail. "All you need to do is sign right there. It'll save us so much headache down the line. You know how complicated these things get if someone passes suddenly." I looked up. "I thought I wasn't family." She blinked. "At the brunch," I added casually. "You told someone I just live here." Her lips twitched. "Oh, Aurelia, don't be sensitive. That was just small talk. You know how people are at events like that. Everyone asks personal questions. I was protecting your privacy." I nodded slowly and smiled. "I'd like to run this through the scanner at the library. We're digitizing legal records. For the archive." She froze for half a second, then forced another smile. "Of course, darling. How responsible of you." I slid the paper back into the envelope, took a sip of tea, and left the office. That afternoon, we attended a community meetup at the town center. It was one of those casual mixers Malis loved. Wine, cheese, small talk, and just enough press coverage to be useful. I stayed near the back, helping set up the donation table. Halfway through the event, Malis made her rounds, greeting everyone with the grace of a senator's wife. She stopped beside me with a camera nearby. "This is Aurelia," she said loudly. "My right hand. She's dependable, organized. I honestly don't know what I'd do without her." The people smiled. I smiled too, but I knew exactly what she'd do without me. Malis tapped my shoulder. "Say a few words, sweetheart. You deserve it." I stepped up and spoke softly. Just a thank you, a comment about the importance of literacy in underserved communities, nothing more. On the ride home, Malis didn't say much, not until we turned onto our street. "You don't need to act so smug," she said without looking at me. "Don't get ideas." "You're not irreplaceable." I turned to the window, watching the dogwood trees blur by. When we got home, I went upstairs and opened an old box under my bed, one of the few things that hadn't been taken over by Melis's redecorating. Inside were receipts, letters, a few old holiday cards. Buried beneath them, I found a memory. Years ago, I'd signed for a delivery, a large shipment of printing paper for the Foundation's annual campaign. Melis had been out that day. I thought I was being helpful. She came home, saw the clipboard on the counter and said, "You shouldn't be putting your name on anything tied to this house. It confuses people." Yet, after that, she started sending me to the post office with forms, told me to just sign and drop off. Over time, I stopped questioning it. At the library the next day, I scanned the document she'd given me. As the pages flickered under the scanner light, my heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. But when I saw the full transfer, not just of property, but of my father's remaining investments, retirement, his own words rewritten, I felt a silence settle over me. It wasn't fear, it wasn't shock, it was clarity. Her name was printed on every page. Mine, once present, was redacted, crossed out and retyped. I saved the scan to my USB, logged out of the public machine, and slid the document back into the envelope. On the walk home, the clouds were gathering. A spring storm was coming. The air smelled like wet concrete. That night, while Melis and Valora watched one of those true crime docuseries in the living room, I slipped into the old study. The room still had the faint scent of my dad's cologne, though it had long been buried under lavender candles and potpourri. I walked to the painting above the bookshelf, a print of a lake in Montana, my father's favorite. Behind it, I found the key, still taped to the back in the spot he once told me about when I was 19, just in case anything ever feels off. I turned it in the lock of the bottom drawer. Inside, there was a worn leather binder. On the front, Renford Estate, personal. I opened it. If Melis wanted war, she just might get one. I stood there in the dark of my father's study, the familiar scent of aged leather and lemon oil still clinging to the air like it hadn't left since he did. The key had turned smoothly in the lock, which almost made me laugh. Of course, Melis hadn't bothered changing it. She didn't think I remembered anything. Inside the safe box, there was nothing flashy. Just a worn black binder, a few sealed envelopes, and a small USB drive tucked neatly into the corner of a felt-lined tray. The drive had a handwritten label, just in case. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the binder spread open in front of me. There it was, my father's original will. Not the updated version Melis had slid across the table last week under the guise of streamlining assets. This version was clear. The house we lived in now was to be left to Melis. Yes, but the second house in Flat Rock? That one was mine, along with a retirement savings account and a detailed instruction that no party shall modify these intentions without full notarized consent from the undersigned or the sole heir, Aurelia Dahmer. I let the pages settle back into place. I wasn't surprised. Not really. I knew what he wanted. He said it more than once when we'd sit on the porch with his second bourbon of the evening. "If anything happens to me, you'll be taken care of. I won't let her rewrite you out of the picture." He didn't live long enough to stop her from trying. I slipped the USB into my pocket, locked the safe again, and left the room without a sound. It was close to midnight, but my mind didn't want rest. I needed to know what was on that drive. Back in my bedroom, I powered up my laptop, slid the drive in, and waited. One file, no password. I clicked play. It was a recording. Clean audio, probably captured during a speakerphone call. I recognized Melis's voice instantly, bright and clipped, the way she sounded when she thought she was being clever. "We'll tell her it's just a routine form," she said. "She doesn't read legal stuff anyway. She's used to following instructions." A pause, then a man's voice, smooth, casual, probably a lawyer or one of her board members. Melis again. "Once that's signed, it's done. Valora inherits everything. I won't let a ghost claim what I've built." The man laughed. So did she. I stared at the screen. The audio kept playing, but I had heard enough. I listened to it again. And a third time. My breathing didn't hitch. My hands didn't tremble. If anything, the calm that settled over me was colder than any grief I'd known. I was done being the overlooked one, the helper, the burden. I made a copy of the audio onto a backup drive, then deleted the original from the USB. I returned everything to its place, slipped the drive into a new envelope, and labeled it in sharp black ink, Renford, retained evidence. The next morning, the doorbell rang just after 10. I was in the kitchen rinsing my coffee mug when I heard Malis answer it, her voice syrupy sweet as always. "Oh, perfect! The invitations are here!" By the time I walked into the dining room, the box had been opened and the gilded envelopes were already being laid out on the table like wedding favors. She handed one to Valora first, her name embossed in gold script, centered and proud. Then she tossed one toward me. "Yours is in there," she said. "Don't say I never include you." I picked it up, heavy cardstock, elegant floral trim, but the name read A. Dalton. Dalton, my father's first wife's last name, not mine, never mine. My fingers traced the letters like they might change under pressure. They didn't. Valora snickered. "Guess the printer glitched." "Or maybe it was just easier," Malis chimed in without looking up. "Too many names makes everything confusing." I didn't respond. I folded the invitation in half, set it on the edge of the table, and walked away. In the hallway, I paused at a framed photo. It was from years ago. Valora's college graduation. Everyone was in it. Except me. I had taken the photo. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about names. When I was 10, I asked if I could change my last name to Renford. I wanted to match the rest of the house, the monograms, the mailbox, the Christmas stockings. Malis had smiled, almost kindly. "Don't rush," she said. "Let's see if you're really part of the family first." My father had sighed but let it go, said we'd revisit it later. We never did. I never got the name. And now, they couldn't even spell the one I did have. I sat up in bed, turned on the lamp, and reached for the manila folder I'd tucked under the mattress. I slid in the copy of the will, the USB drive, the invitation. Then, in bold letters, I wrote on the outside, "Renford, retained evidence." This wasn't a collection anymore. It was a file, a record. I didn't need to play fair. I just needed to be smart. By noon the next day, while Malis was out meeting with the florist for her gala, I made a phone call I'd kept putting off for months. Lindsay, my coworker at the library, had once mentioned a legal aid clinic downtown. She even slipped me a brochure when we were organizing a literacy drive. "Just in case," she'd said. "Sometimes family gets messy." I dialed the number, heart steady. A woman picked up. "Asheville Legal Resource Center. How can I help you?" I introduced myself, then paused. "I need to talk to someone about inheritance fraud," I said, "and I have documentation." She didn't gasp. She didn't pause. Instead, she said something I hadn't heard in a very long time. "Let's schedule a time for you to come in, Ms. Dahmer. We'll take a look together." I had finally said it out loud, and I meant every word. The moment hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Malis didn't flinch, but I watched her knuckles whiten around her wine glass, the way someone might brace before a storm. Valora looked away, swirling the ice in her drink with deliberate disinterest. The other guests, scattered across our over-decorated living room with flutes of champagne and two polished smiles, grew uncomfortably quiet. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned, left the room, and climbed the stairs one steady step at a time. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't cry. Upstairs, I opened my closet and pulled out the file folder again. Renford, retained evidence. It felt heavier now, like it wasn't just a collection of documents, but a mirror. Something that finally showed me who I was and who I no longer needed to be. The week had started quietly. Too quietly. That Monday, I received an email from the library's community board. I'd been nominated for the Community Dedication Award. I hadn't submitted anything, of course. Someone else had done it, likely Lindsay, who always noticed the things no one else did. I read the email 3 times before it sank in. I was going to be recognized for something. For once, not as someone's helper, not in the shadows. The awards gala was set for Friday evening at the town hall. I didn't plan to invite Malis or Valora. It wasn't spite. It was preservation. But by Thursday afternoon, I overheard Melis on the phone in the hallway. Yes, we'll be there. Oh, I believe it was just a mistake on the form. Valora's the face of our outreach, really. Of course, I'll speak to them before the ceremony. That night, she left a velvet garment bag hanging on my bedroom door. I had this steamed for you, she said, voice chipper. We're all going to the gala tomorrow. Families should support each other, right? The tone didn't fool me. She was already playing the role she wanted the public to see. Friday came faster than I expected. The hall was bright and buzzing when I arrived. Rows of chairs lined in gold ribbon, centerpieces at every table. I sat near the back, alone. Melis and Valora entered a few minutes later, holding hands like co-hosts of a reality show. I didn't wave. They didn't look back. The ceremony moved quickly. Awards for business leadership, arts advocacy, youth mentorship. Then came the category I'd been nominated for, Community Dedication Award. The presenter stepped to the podium, glasses perched low on her nose. Our next honoree is someone whose quiet efforts have shaped literacy programming in underserved communities. She's been a quiet but constant presence at our public library, leading donation drives, weekend tutoring, and more. Please welcome Aurelia Da. There's been a mistake. Melis's voice rang out from the second row. The presenter froze mid-sentence. Melis stood, hand on Valora's shoulder. I believe the nomination was meant for Valora Ridge, my daughter. She's been the primary coordinator for most of our family's community work. The silence in the room was instant and cutting. The presenter blinked, clearly unsure. I see. Well, thank you for the clarification. No one looked at me, not even once. I remained seated. My name had never sounded so disposable. Later, in the reception hall, I kept my distance. I sipped soda water near the refreshment table, nodding politely as guests brushed past, none stopping to ask what had happened. Valora posed for pictures with the award I never held. Melis stood beside her, beaming with the pride of someone who just rewrote a headline. We drove back in silence. Melis offered no apology. Valora scrolled her phone the whole way, too busy replying to Instagram comments to bother acknowledging me. The house was full of people again. Melis had decided to host a little celebration, which meant catered desserts, imported cheeses, and guests who all looked vaguely familiar but never remembered my name. I stayed upstairs for a while, changed out of the dress she picked for me, and debated whether to go down at all. Then I heard it. A man's voice, probably one of Melis's friends from the foundation board. You must be proud of both your girls, he said. Melis chuckled, loud enough for it to carry into the hallway. Well, one of them contributes. The other lives here rent-free and enjoys the leftovers. Laughter followed. I didn't think. I just moved. I walked down the stairs slowly, deliberately. When I stepped into the room, the laughter didn't stop. It choked. I faced Melis directly. She didn't blink. She raised her glass as if I were the one making a scene. If I'm not a contributor, I said calmly, then you won't mind if I stop contributing. I pulled a folded sheet of paper from my pocket and handed it to her. I'm done running errands, done cleaning, organizing, fetching, done acting like this is a home. The room went still. She unfolded the note with theatrical slowness. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered. What is this? She asked. It's a formal declaration. I've submitted a petition for my share of the estate. Effective immediately, I'll be handling my own affairs. Someone gasped. Valora's glass clinked against the rim of the serving tray. She didn't say a word. Melis stared at me for several seconds. Then she laughed. Just once, short and sharp. Oh, honey, we've all had bad days. I'm not having one, I said. You are. You just don't know it yet. I turned and walked out of the room. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a beginning. But if she thought I was done, she had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks had passed since the night I stood in front of Melis and told her I was done being the help. She hadn't spoken to me directly since, not once. She floated through the house like I wasn't there, offering Valora her usual parade of over-the-top affection while I moved through rooms like a ghost she was trying to will out of existence. So when she came knocking on my bedroom door that morning, with her voice suddenly soft and motherly, I knew something was off. "I was hoping you could help with the setup this evening," she said. "It's Valora's engagement party, and things are a bit tight." I didn't answer right away. She continued, "You're still part of the family, aren't you? We can't do this without you." It wasn't a question. It was bait, a performance line. I nodded once, not because I agreed with her, but because I had my own reasons to be there. That evening, the rooftop venue was already buzzing by the time I arrived. The air was heavy with perfume and pretense. I spotted Malis by the entrance, directing staff, rearranging flower placements like the entire evening hinged on petal symmetry. The moment she saw me, her face lit up, not with warmth, but with the satisfaction of control. "Perfect timing," she said, pressing a tray into my hands. "Can you circulate the hors d'oeuvres?" I looked at the tray, then at her. "Sure." I moved through the crowd, passing around miniature crab cakes and stuffed mushrooms, nodding politely to guests who didn't know my name, some of whom I'd seen at every family event for years. Near the bar, a waiter looked at me, confused. "You one of the catering team?" Before I could answer, Malis's voice cut through the air behind me. "Oh, she's good at multitasking. Might as well be useful." There was laughter, tight, performative. I felt my fingers grip the silver tray tighter. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. About an hour into the event, while trying to rest my feet near the back terrace, someone approached me. A woman in a navy-wrapped dress. I recognized her immediately. She'd been at the awards gala where Malis had intercepted my recognition. "Didn't you receive that award a few weeks ago?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "The community dedication one?" I hesitated, offering a polite smile. "I was nominated." Her brows pulled tighter. "Your stepmother told us you weren't related, that the award was meant for her daughter." I didn't answer right away. "I remember seeing your name in the original email," she added. "And I've seen your work at the library. You're the one who runs the outreach programs, aren't you?" I nodded. "That's me." She blinked, clearly unsettled. "That's strange. I'll be right back." I watched her move through the crowd, pausing to whisper something to another guest. Like a dropped match in dry grass, it started. Small whispers, turning heads, little nods, and furrowed brows sweeping across the rooftop like a breeze before the storm. Near the DJ booth, a younger woman I didn't know murmured to a friend, "That's the girl who coordinates the book drives. I thought she was just a volunteer." The mood shifted. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. Enough for Malis to notice. She locked eyes with me from across the venue. Her smile thinned. That was when another guest came up to me directly, a man in his 60s, tweed jacket, kind eyes. "Miss, you don't say much, but I've heard your name more tonight than I ever have before," he said. "You do good work. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Something inside me clicked into place. I took a deep breath, then walked over to the small table where I'd left my purse earlier. I pulled out the manila folder. Renford, retained evidence. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I simply held it in one hand, cradled against my side like a silent warning. A woman nearby asked, "Are you part of the foundation too?" I turned to her. "I've contributed more than you know," I said, voice calm. I just stopped saying it out loud. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "I've been quiet because I believed there was value in letting things play out. But silence doesn't protect people. It buries them." Someone else stepped closer. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done playing quiet," I replied. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stood there, shoulders back, eyes steady, holding that folder like a baton in a relay I never asked to run. Malis approached then, her heels clacking across the tile like a metronome to her temper. Valora followed behind her, champagne in hand, looking mildly annoyed by the disruption. Malis spoke through clenched teeth. "Aurelia, what is this?" "This," I said, tapping the folder, "is everything I've never said." "I asked you to help, to show support." "This was never support," I replied. This was spectacle, and I've been the backstage crew long enough. She took a step closer. Are you seriously going to ruin your sister's night? I tilted my head. She's not my sister. Not by blood. And not by choice. More guests were watching now. Valora sipped her drink, said nothing. I handed the tray I'd been holding to the nearest server and turned to Melis one last time. This is the last favor, I told her. You can clear your own mess from now on. Then I walked away. I didn't run. I didn't slam doors. I walked, right out of that rooftop party, past valet attendants who nodded but didn't speak, down the sidewalk into the cool night air. Half a block away, I heard someone say behind me, low and sure, "She handled that with more class than anyone else here." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The more she tried to erase me, the louder the truth became. The morning after Valora's engagement party, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop. I assumed it was more of the same. Group messages from the library team, spam updates from community mailing lists. But as I flipped it open, the home screen told a different story. Chair of Renford Foundation allegedly silenced stepdaughter's contributions. There were no names attached to the leak, no official quotes, just sources familiar with the family, followed by paragraphs detailing a decade of my volunteer work being attributed to Valora. My images used without credit, awards redirected, contributions rewritten. It wasn't just local. 2 regional blogs had already picked it up, and the story was gaining traction, fast. I scrolled through the notifications, watching names I didn't recognize share, comment, question. Some responses were defensive, longtime donors refusing to believe Melis could do something so calculated. Others were beginning to ask the right questions. By mid-morning, Melis called. For the first time in years, I let it ring out, and when she called again, I blocked her number. I didn't need to hear her voice to know exactly what it would sound like. Cool, composed, maybe with just the right amount of trembling to sound like the victim. She wasn't used to being exposed. She was used to orchestrating every conversation, owning every narrative. Until now. 2 days later, during a press event for the Renford Foundation's Spring Initiative, a photographer snapped a shot of Valora standing beneath a banner featuring an image I'd taken during last year's flood relief drive, me handing out blankets to an elderly couple. Except the caption under the image read, "Valora Ridge delivers aid to displaced families." I didn't need to say a word. By lunch, a local journalist had reached out to the foundation, asking for clarification. Melis responded with her usual poise, insisting the attribution was an honest miscommunication and that every member of our family contributes equally. But the internet didn't buy it, especially not when Lindsay, my coworker from the library, commented publicly on the post. That was her. Aurelia was the one delivering supplies, not Valora. I was there. Her words were simple, but they hit harder than anything I could have posted myself. And then the shares started. The thread expanded. Former volunteers chimed in. Students I'd tutored. Families I'd helped connect with city services. The truth wasn't just speaking, it was screaming. Melis tried to stay ahead of it, but you can't outrun your own footprints once the snow starts to melt. The board of directors for the foundation called a meeting and invited me. I wasn't surprised. I arrived at the boardroom 5 minutes early. It was the same downtown office where Melis had once hosted donor brunches and whispered about those who didn't belong in certain rooms. Now I belonged. She sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, notebook open, smile as polished as ever. Valora was beside her, stone-faced, scrolling her phone. The chair of the board opened the meeting with a tense breath. We've received significant public attention surrounding a series of claims about misattribution and internal operations, he began. We're here today to assess those concerns and review documentation provided over the last 48 hours. Melis was first to speak. Look, she began with a half laugh. I understand how quickly misinformation spreads online, especially when personal grudges are involved. She gestured toward me without saying my name. My husband's daughter, she's always been emotionally complicated. She's misinterpreting years of love and inclusion. I've given her more than anyone could have expected. And this is her way of punishing me for being successful. Someone on the board, a woman I hadn't met before, raised a hand. Then why was she never officially listed as part of the Foundation's active members, despite years of documented volunteer hours? Malis blinked. She preferred to stay behind the scenes. She said she didn't want the attention. I shook my head slightly. Another board member chimed in. And what about the financials tied to the flood relief program? We've seen photo and testimonial evidence contradicting the official grant reports. Malis opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She turned to Valora. Tell them. You know how much we all contributed. Valora glanced up briefly, then back at her phone. She said nothing, not a word, and that silence, thick and suffocating, said more than any speech could. Later that evening, I sat at my desk at home and drafted a short email. I kept it simple. Subject, in defense of silence, attachments, audio recording, Malis and her lawyer planning to cut me out of the will, copy of my father's original will, timeline of my work over the last 12 years. I didn't write anything in the body of the message, just signed it. Aurelia Dahmer. No longer invisible. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, made tea, and sat by the window. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, clear. The next day, I heard the crash from downstairs, a wine glass. Then Malis's voice, ragged and vicious. Say something. You owe me. There was a pause, then footsteps moving away, Valora leaving. Malis called out after her, but it wasn't anger in her voice. It was fear, desperation. The woman who had built her life around appearances was now cracking in a house full of silence. And as I sat upstairs, sipping my tea, I knew it wasn't over yet. That night, I passed by Malis's office and heard the low hum of her speakerphone. She was whispering, I need to fix this. I don't care how. Just make it go away. Some things you win not by fighting, but by walking away with your dignity. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., sharp at the town hall, and by 9:30, the main room was already nearly full. The long wooden benches held a mix of familiar faces and total strangers, council members, press, local nonprofit directors, a few former donors, and, scattered in the back, a handful of quiet supporters I hadn't expected. Malis arrived late, as always, flanked by her PR consultant and wearing the same cream blazer she'd worn to every fundraising event for the past 3 years. Her lipstick was perfect, her posture sharper than ever. Valora arrived separately, no entourage, no fanfare. She sat 3 rows behind her mother and didn't look at her once. I took my seat near the back, folder in hand, still labeled Renford, retained evidence. Not a briefcase, not a lawyer by my side. Just me. At the front of the room, a clerk called the hearing to order, reading through the issues under review. Misattribution of community labor, unauthorized use of image, questions regarding document tampering related to foundation finances and family estate affairs. It sounded clinical when read aloud. Cold. But for the first time, it wasn't just whispered between volunteers or gossiped over wine, it was official. A nameplate in the center of the front table caught my eye. Community Oversight Committee. Public Inquiry Panel. When they called my name, I stood. I felt the weight of eyes, some curious, others skeptical, a few sympathetic. I didn't walk quickly. I didn't lower my head. I walked like someone who had nothing left to prove. Standing at the podium, I took a second before speaking, not to collect myself, just to breathe. I won't speak long, I began. My voice didn't shake. I've spent most of my adult life working quietly, behind the scenes, after hours, without credit, not because I was asked to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. A pause. Sometimes, the most exhausting labor isn't physical. It's emotional. The kind that no one thanks you for, that leaves no pictures, no plaques, but still leaves scars. I lifted the folder slightly, then set it on the table beside me. Everything you need to review is here. Records, photos, witness statements. You can read it, or not. Either way, I'm free. Then I stepped down and returned to my seat. I didn't look at Malis. The panel chair thanked me, adjusted his glasses, and nodded to the next name on the list, Valora. There was a brief shuffle of papers and awkward glances. She hadn't been listed as a speaker, but she stood anyway. "I wasn't planning to say anything," she began, voice quieter than usual, "but I've watched this spiral for weeks. And honestly, for years." She turned toward the panel, then to the room itself. "I always thought protecting the family meant keeping things quiet, smiling, posing, pretending. But I've realized it doesn't protect anyone. It just isolates people." She turned toward me, not dramatically, just directly. "My sister built more for this town than I ever did." There were a few audible gasps. One woman in the front clapped once before catching herself. Then a ripple of applause began, slow but certain. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. I nodded once. That was enough. I didn't need the spotlight. But the acknowledgement was a different kind of light altogether. The panel recessed for 10 minutes, then reconvened with a statement. Effective immediately, Malis Renford would step down from her leadership role at the foundation pending a full audit. Her name would be temporarily removed from civic award listings until the investigation concluded. The board would appoint a temporary chairperson within the week. All financial records were to be submitted for review within 72 hours. No screaming, no gavel slams, just quiet justice. Malis didn't speak. Her consultant scribbled notes furiously. Her lawyer whispered something, but I couldn't hear it over the weight of the moment. That evening, I passed by the front room of the house and saw her standing in front of the wall of framed awards. She wasn't crying, she wasn't even fuming, she was taking them down, one by one. Later, the local paper called me. A few reporters too. One offered a feature interview. Another asked if I'd consider writing a guest column about reclaiming your voice. I declined them all. I didn't want a headline. I wanted peace. At the library the next morning, a student I used to tutor stopped me on the way in. "Miss Aurelia," he said, wide-eyed, "I saw you on the news. You did something big." I smiled, knelt beside him. "Sometimes the biggest things are the quietest, you know?" He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't fully. Before the committee adjourned that day, one of the board members picked up the folder I had left on the table. They flipped it open and paused. It was empty. They hadn't noticed. They didn't need to. The truth had already arrived. The wounds didn't disappear, but they no longer owned me. 3 months had passed since the town hall hearing. The weather in Asheville had shifted, not dramatically, just enough to feel the season stretching into early summer. The sun stayed out longer. Trees along the main street swayed in gentler winds, and downtown was humming with small joys again. Coffee shop chatter, bikes passing crosswalks, kids laughing in strollers. Life moved forward, and so did I. This morning, I stood alone inside a half-finished room tucked into the corner of an old building on Haywood Street. The drywall had just been painted a soft, warm white. The floors had been polished, the windows scrubbed clean. The only thing missing were the people, the women, this place was meant for. I walked slowly along the edge of the wall, fingertips grazing the fresh surface. It still smelled faintly of glue and sawdust, but underneath, there was a different feeling. Not ownership, not revenge. Belonging. A few months ago, I wouldn't have imagined this. A space not just for me, but for women like me. The ones who poured themselves into everyone else until nothing was left. Who were always introduced as someone's assistant, someone's support system, someone's invisible anchor. Never by name. But this building had one now. Above the door, carved in brass and hung with quiet confidence, read, "Inner Light Collective, a place to be seen." The name came from a letter I found tucked inside one of my grandmother's old recipe books. I hadn't opened that drawer in years. I didn't even remember keeping the book. But one afternoon, while organizing supplies for the center, I found it wedged between a bundle of forgotten linen napkins, yellowed, frayed at the corners. Inside the back cover, folded like a secret, was her handwriting. "If they ever make you feel like nothing, remember, you came from someone who gave you everything." I read it 3 times before framing it. Now, it hung just above my desk in the office of the new center. Not large, not modern, but entirely mine. I placed it at eye level so I'd see it every morning. Not because I needed the reminder, but because some women would. Just as I finished pinning the last print on the wall, I heard a knock. Valora. She stood in the doorway in jeans and a gray t-shirt, a far cry from the polished look she wore at Melis's side. She held a manila envelope in one hand, not labeled, no fanfare. I didn't know what to write on it, she said, offering a faint smile. So I left it blank. I stepped aside and let her in. She handed me the envelope and sat on the bench by the window. I opened it slowly. Inside, a small check and a note, for the ones who never got a seat at the table. She didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer any. We sat in silence for a few minutes before I said, "We don't need to be sisters, but we can choose not to be strangers." She nodded. "That's fair." When she left, she didn't hug me. I didn't expect her to. A few days later, someone mentioned that Melis had moved 2 towns east into a modest duplex near a park. Rumors said she volunteered at a food pantry now, that she kept to herself. No one mentioned the hearing anymore, not in public. And maybe that was justice enough. Not humiliation, not punishment, just obscurity. For someone who once demanded every room revolve around her, being left out of the conversation was the loudest consequence. On the center's opening day, 5 women arrived, all of them in different stages of survival. One carried a baby, another brought a bag of court papers, 2 held hands like lifelines. None of them knew my full story. That was okay. They didn't need to. We didn't sit in a circle. We didn't start with introductions. We just existed together for an hour, breathing, listening, allowing space to be what it was. Honest. That was the first class. A month later, we added journaling sessions, then weekly meditations. We didn't call them healing circles. We didn't promise transformation, just connection, just a moment of being visible without needing to prove why. One afternoon, I stayed late to close up. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the last rays of sun stretch across the wooden floors. I didn't think about Melis. I didn't think about my father's will, or the committee, or the lies that tried to erase me. I thought about what I built, what I chose instead. I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. I wasn't built to fight for a seat at their table. I built my own table, and that was enough. I reached for the leather notebook I kept in my drawer and scribbled on the front page. For every woman who was told to be quiet, this space is for you. When I locked the door that evening, I glanced back one last time at the sign outside the window. Lit softly by a small lantern, it read, "Inner Light Collective, a place to be seen." Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight louder, it's to walk away with your dignity intact. Aurelia didn't need to destroy anyone. She simply chose to stop being erased. And in doing so, she built something that gave others the very thing she had been denied: visibility. What about you? Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? If this story moved you, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true family stories just like this one.